Sometimes fate doesn't knock. It crashes right into your life when you're too tired to dream. That's what happened the day Grace walked into that clinic with nothing but a borrowed coat, a shaky voice, and her son's tiny hand clutched in hers. She wasn't looking for miracles, just one more chance to survive. But little did she know, her kindness would change the life of a girl everyone else had already given up on. So if you believe in second chances or how one heart can reignite another, stay till the end. And don't forget to like and comment if this story touches yours. Grace Miller didn't expect anything to come easy, not anymore. Life had already taken too much from her. Her home, her dreams, and the man she once called her husband. Now, as a struggling single mom juggling night shifts and daycare bills, her focus was her 7-year-old son, Lucas, bright-eyed, endlessly curious, and the only reason she kept moving. That rainy Tuesday afternoon, Grace entered Westbridge Neurological Center not as a patient or nurse, but as a desperate applicant. She'd heard they needed part-time help cleaning equipment and assisting in the pediatric recovery wing. Not glamorous, but steady. The receptionist, polite but distracted, handed her a clipboard. Grace filled it out quickly, heart racing. That's when she first saw her, wheeled silently into the waiting area by a stern-looking nurse. A girl no older than 9, with long auburn hair and haunting blue eyes. Eyes that didn't blink when the light flickered. Eyes that looked past people like they weren't there. Her legs remained unmoving. Her hands, curled gently on the armrest of her wheelchair, trembled faintly. Lucas noticed first. He nudged his mom, whispering, "Mom, she's sad." Grace followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. Something in that little girl's face looked hollow, not just physically broken, but emotionally absent, like someone had flipped a switch inside her and forgotten to turn it back on. Before Grace could stop him, Lucas walked right up to her and held out a toy dinosaur from his backpack. "This one's a fighter," he said softly. "He doesn't quit." The nurse looked startled. The girl didn't react. But something shifted. Her fingers twitched. Just barely. From behind the glass wall, a tall man in a tailored suit froze mid-conversation with a doctor. His eyes locked on the scene unfolding across the lobby, and for the first time in weeks, his face softened. He walked out slowly, like a man trying not to scare away a fragile moment. The powerful CEO, the man who had built empires, and lost his daughter's smile in the process. "Excuse me," he said gently to Grace. "Your son, what did he just say to her?" Grace, flustered, looked up. He just offered hope. Kids don't need permission to do that. That moment, that accidental meeting, would set everything in motion, a silent bond, an unspoken need, and a promise that hadn't yet been made. But it would be. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with medicine. It begins with a shared story, a knowing glance, or a simple, "I've been where you are." For the first time in years, there was warmth in the mansion, not from sunlight, but from laughter. Layla, the single mom who had entered the CEO's world as nothing more than a hired caretaker, now found herself becoming part of his daughter's emotional universe. Ella, the paralyzed girl who once flinched at touch, now let Layla braid her hair. She even asked her to read bedtime stories, something she'd never done since the accident. Layla understood the unspoken pain. She never pried, never pushed. She simply showed up, day after day. She stayed by Ella's side, even when the little girl had episodes, nightmares, silent tears, sudden screams from past trauma. Layla never judged. She soothed her with soft lullabies and patient silence. What surprised the CEO, Mr. Callan Gray, most was not Layla's resilience, but her refusal to take credit. When he tried to thank her, she would say, "She's doing this. I'm just here." One afternoon, Callan returned home early from a meeting. As he stepped through the door, he heard a strange sound echoing from the garden. Laughter, Ella's laughter. There she was in her wheelchair, her head thrown back in delight as Layla mimicked a clumsy bird, arms flapping wildly, making ridiculous noises. She didn't care how she looked. She only cared that Ella smiled. Callan stood there unmoving. That laugh had once belonged to his wife, the kind that lit up rooms. And now it belonged to his daughter again, thanks to a woman who barely knew them but cared more deeply than anyone ever had. That evening, Callan found himself asking Layla questions about her life, genuinely curious. They sat in the kitchen while Ella napped, sipping coffee over the soft hum of a rainstorm. "I lost someone too," Layla said quietly. "It doesn't go away. But helping others, sometimes that helps you survive." And for the first time in years, the man who built an empire by controlling every outcome felt peace in surrendering just a little to someone else's grace. What neither of them realized was that this connection, still so fragile, was about to be tested in ways neither was ready for. Not all broken things are visible, and some truths wait in silence until love gives them permission to speak. It began with a phone call Layla wasn't supposed to overhear. She had just finished folding Ella's laundry when she passed by Callan's home office. The door was ajar, and his voice was sharp, an edge Layla hadn't heard before. "I told you, I don't care about the media backlash. I'm not sending her to another hospital, not after what they did." There was a long pause, then a softer voice. "She doesn't need another treatment plan. She needs someone who sees her, someone who still believes in her." Layla froze, her heart thudding. It wasn't just grief or guilt that Callan carried. There was something else, something he had never told her. Later that night, when Ella had fallen asleep, Layla gently asked, "Was it the accident? Is that why the hospitals gave up?" Callan didn't look up from his glass. They didn't give up. They just didn't care. Not really. Ella was a liability to them. Just another rich man's problem. "And you?" Layla asked softly. "I was too busy being a CEO," he said, his voice heavy. "I missed the signs. I missed the chance to be her father when she needed me most." Layla wanted to reach across the table, to tell him that guilt was a shadow that grew with silence. But before she could speak, Callan turned the question around. "What about you, Layla? Why do you really take this job? A woman like you could have had any family to work for." She hesitated. Then finally she spoke. "Because when I saw Ella, I saw my son." Callan blinked. "You have a child?" "I had," she whispered. "Noah. He was 8. A car crash. Same year your wife passed. I wasn't driving, but I was late picking him up. He never made it to the crosswalk." Silence fell like a veil over them both. "I thought helping Ella might help me breathe again. I didn't know she'd start healing me too." It wasn't a confession. It was a surrender. And in that moment, they both saw each other clearly, not as employer and employee, not as wounded father and hired caretaker, but as two people quietly breaking, quietly holding each other together. But just as their bond deepened, a storm was forming outside their fragile peace. Because someone from Callan's past had been watching, someone who didn't want Ella recovering, who had something to gain from her silence. Sometimes the greatest threat doesn't come from strangers, but from the ones who once promised to protect you. The call came just before midnight. Callan was tucking Ella in when his phone buzzed. A known number. Normally he ignored them, but tonight something told him to answer. "Hello," a distorted voice replied, cold and calculated. "You should have left her where she was, Callan. This little recovery fantasy of yours. It's dangerous." Click. Callan stared at the phone, his blood turning to ice. Layla noticed his silence when he came back downstairs. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," he lied. "Just some boardroom politics spilling into my off hours." But that wasn't the truth. Not even close. The next morning, strange things started happening. Ella's wheelchair brake mysteriously failed during their morning walk. Layla caught it just in time before the ramp. That afternoon, the security system glitched. Footage from the front gate was wiped clean. Then came the report from a nurse who'd reviewed Ella's medical file. "There's a gap in her records," she whispered to Layla privately. "A full 2 months missing. No hospital visits. No prescriptions. It's like someone erased part of her history." And that's when Layla remembered something Ella had said in her sleep the night before. A name. Graham. She whispered it over and over again, like a warning. When Layla brought up to Callan, his face changed. "Graham Whitlock," he said grimly. "My late wife's brother. My former so. He wanted full power after her death. But when I refused to sell off Ella's shares in the company, he disappeared. Or so I thought." Layla leaned in, her voice firm. What if he never disappeared? What if he's been pulling strings from behind the curtain? And what if Ella remembers? That night, they went through Ella's old sketchbooks, the only place she could express herself before she started speaking again. And there, tucked between 2 pages, was a drawing that made Callan's hands tremble. A tall man in a black suit, standing at the foot of Ella's hospital bed, with a syringe in his hand. Ella had drawn the truth. She had always remembered. And now, someone was coming to make sure she never told. They thought she was safe. They thought he was gone. But evil doesn't knock. It breaks in. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Callan checked the locks 3 times before going to bed. Layla double-checked Ella's room, making sure her wheelchair was beside the bed, her weighted blanket tucked around her tiny frame. "I'm not scared," Ella whispered as Layla leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I know," Layla smiled softly, "because you're brave." But the truth was, they were all scared, because something had shifted. They could feel it. At 3:17 a.m., the motion detectors triggered. Callan's phone lit up, front gate breach. But when he pulled up the feed, the screen was blank. Static. He ran to Ella's room. Empty. The blanket lay crumpled. The window open. A footprint on the windowsill. "Ella!" he screamed. Layla stumbled in behind him, panic flooding her chest. "She's gone." "Callan, where is she?" Downstairs, the security room had been ransacked. Whoever took her knew the system, knew the house, knew Ella. Then the intercom buzzed. One word: checkmate. It was Graham, the man presumed dead, the man they never saw coming. And he had Ella. Callan's fist slammed the wall. He was in the house, maybe for days, watching, planning. Layla stood still, her mind racing, piecing together the pattern. He didn't take her to hurt her. "What are you saying?" "She's the heir, Callan. She's a majority shareholder after your wife passed. He doesn't get control of the company unless she signs off. Alive. He's going to force her to give up her rights," Callan whispered, realization crashing into him. "And if she refuses, he'll make it look like an accident," Layla finished grimly. They had hours at most. Callan knew what he had to do. Graham had a private estate outside the city, off-grid, armed, and surrounded by miles of forest. "You can't go alone," Layla insisted. "I'm not asking, but I'm coming with you." Callan looked at her, this woman who had stepped into his daughter's life as a stranger, and now stood beside him as something more. "You sure?" Layla grabbed a duffel and loaded it with medical supplies, a flare gun, and the old revolver from the safe. "We're bringing her home," she said, and they vanished into the night. They reached the gates of hell to find her, but getting in was only the beginning. Getting out alive was another story. Callan and Layla crouched in the shadows of the trees, eyes fixed on the estate's perimeter. It was quiet. Too quiet for a place that should have been abandoned. Motion sensors blinked softly near the tree lean. Guards paced, armed and silent, like shadows made flesh. "He's expecting us," Callan whispered. Layla nodded, gripping the flare gun tighter. "Then let's not disappoint him." They waited for the storm, and when the thunder cracked, they moved. Callan disabled the alarm grid with a bypass tool Ella had once built for a school project, now her only lifeline. They slipped inside through a service tunnel. It was old, crumbling, humid with rot and dust, but it led directly beneath the west wing, Graham's private quarters. Where would he keep her? Layla whispered. Callan paused. If he's trying to scare her into signing everything over, he'll keep her close, somewhere visible, where she sees everything but can't escape it. They emerged into the corridor and saw the cameras. Every room, every angle. But one screen drew Layla's eye. Ella, strapped to a reclining chair, IVs in her arms, her head bobbing like she was sedated. The room was pure glass, walls, ceiling, even the floor. She was awake. She saw the camera. And mouthed, "Don't come." Layla's heart cracked. But Callan grabbed her arm. "That's not fear. That's warning." A loudspeaker buzzed to life. Well, Graham's voice oozed through the hallway. Didn't expect a nurse to play hero. But here you are. A door slammed open. Armed men, 4 of them. Laser sights cut through the dark. Layla raised a flare gun and fired at the sprinkler system. Water rained down. Sparks flew. Callan threw a chair into the nearest guard. Chaos erupted. They ran. Room by room, floor by floor, they clawed their way toward Ella. Layla used a taser from her kit. Callan wielded a crowbar, like a soldier who trained for war his whole life. But they were bleeding, exhausted, and when they reached the glass chamber, Graham was already waiting, gun in one hand, contract in the other. Signed Sweetheart, he cooed to Ella. Or Daddy and the nurse die. But Ella had other plans. While he ranted, she twisted her wrist just enough to flip a switch beneath the chair. The glass walls began to fog. Then crack. She'd overloaded the pressure seals. The chamber exploded outward, shards flying. Layla threw herself over Ella. Callan lunged for Graham. The gun fired. Someone screamed, and the world went white. In one breath, she took back her power. But in the next, someone paid for it in blood. Smoke curled from the shattered remains of the glass chamber. Sirens wailed in the distance, either security backup or emergency response. No one knew. All Layla could hear was the rush of her heartbeat and Ella's faint breathing. "Ella, stay with me," she whispered, cradling the girl's head. Callan rolled over with a grunt, clutching his arm, blood soaking through his sleeve. The bullet had missed his chest by inches. But Graham wasn't moving. He lay beneath a collapsed beam, motionless, gun tossed yards away. Ella blinked slowly. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "You didn't," Callan rasped. "You saved yourself." But it wasn't over. Graham stirred. He wasn't dead, just dazed. And when his eyes locked onto the shredded contract, lying in the broken glass, something changed. Rage. "I gave you everything," he snarled. "A name that meant something. And you spit on it." He reached for the second gun strapped to his ankle. Callan shouted, and oh, but Ella was faster. She kicked the gun aside and stood, weak, trembling, but with steel in her eyes. "You don't own me," she said. "Not my life, not my body, not my name." She lifted the metal clipboard from Layla's bag and struck the emergency fire alarm. In seconds, red lights blinked. Automated lockdowns reversed. Doors unlocked. And the front gates opened. They didn't wait. Callan helped Ella limp out, Layla covering their backs. Outside, flashing lights of police vehicles lit the night. Officers swarmed in. Layla handed Ella to the paramedics. "She's a priority." "What about you?" one asked. She smiled faintly. "I'll live." As they rolled Ella away, she reached back and grabbed Callan's fingers. "I'll see you on the other side," she whispered. He nodded, eyes bright. Later, in a hospital room with sterile sheets and fresh air, Ella finally slept without restraints. Layla stood by the window, watching the sunrise. Callan came in, arm bandaged. They're charging Graham with unlawful detainment, abuse, corporate fraud, half the book. Layla exhaled. And the board, frozen all his accounts. Ella's name is legally restored. She can claim it or leave it. They both looked at her. "What do you think she'll do?" Layla asked softly. Callan shrugged. That name cost her everything. Maybe it's time she built a new one. But in the corridor outside, Ella had left a note on her food tray. It read, "I'll never be his daughter again, but I'll be someone's." Signed, Ella Layla Hart. When freedom finally came, she didn't wait for applause. She just disappeared. It had been 3 days since the fire alarm blared and Ella walked into the night as her own person. The hospital room where she once lay was now empty. Sheets folded, monitors quiet. Callan entered it that morning to find only her bracelet resting on the windowsill. A note beneath it read, "Thank you for giving me a chance. Now I need to learn who I am, without cages, without names." He didn't tell Layla immediately. She knew anyway. The silence in her gut said it all. "She's gone, isn't she?" Layla said when they met later at a quiet diner on 6th Street. Callan nodded. No security footage. No sightings. Just gone. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Layla said, "She's not running. She's exploring." Callan cracked a faint smile. Yeah, that's what you do when you're free. A week passed. Then, too, in a distant part of the country, a young woman with short cropped hair and a dusty backpack knocked on the door of a rural community center. She offered no last name, just Ella. I heard you need volunteers. Inside, children painted murals on cracked walls, and an old woman teaching English smiled at her gently. You can stay if you want, the woman said. We don't ask questions. Ella smiled. I've had too many answers lately. Back in the city, Layla stood at the rooftop of the research center, the same building where Ella had once been locked in a glass room. Now, the chamber had been demolished. A greenhouse grew in its place. Callan stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the vines slowly crawl up the trellis. She'll come back, he said. Layla nodded. Maybe not here, but to herself? Yeah, she's already on her way. Weeks later, Layla received a small package with no return address. Inside was a postcard with a painting of wildflowers and an uneven scrawl on the back. Tell him I'm safe and happy. And finally me, E. Taped to the corner was a tiny pressed daisy. Layla cried for the first time since it all ended, not from sorrow, but because she finally believed that girl had survived, not as Graham's daughter, not as a lab subject, not even as Ella Hart, but as Ella, nothing more, nothing less. Just when Ella thought she was free, a familiar voice echoed from the shadows. They're still looking for you. It had been 3 months since Ella vanished. In that time, she lived quietly, helping in kitchens, painting community murals, sleeping on folded cots under borrowed roofs. No one knew who she was, and that was exactly how she liked it, until the stranger arrived. He came at dusk, wearing a hoodie soaked from rain, lingering just outside the gate of the community shelter. Ella was sweeping the courtyard when he looked up and smiled. Ella Hart, he said softly. Her broom stopped mid-swing. No one here knew that name. Don't worry, he continued. I'm not here to bring you in. I'm here to warn you. Ella's chest tightened. Who are you? I used to work for your father, he said, but I left when I saw what they did to you, what they still want from you. Ella stared at him. My father is dead. Yeah, but his legacy isn't, and some very powerful people think you still belong to them. That night, Ella didn't sleep. She sat under the open sky, trying to remember how it felt to be just Ella, not someone created or owned, not someone hunted. She thought of Layla, of Callan, of the greenhouse built where her prison once stood, and she realized something terrifying. Freedom was beautiful, but peace, that was something you had to fight for. 2 days later, she vanished again. Left behind was another note, shorter this time. Tell them I'm not running. I'm coming back. E. Back in the city, Layla was analyzing neuromapping scans when the envelope arrived, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a flash drive. She plugged it into her laptop and saw grainy footage. Ella, walking into a corporate biotech building, smiling at security, wearing a passcode badge she should never have been able to access. Why would she go back there? Callan asked, standing beside Layla. She's not going back, Layla whispered. She's ending it. She thought she was the only one. But in the cold silence of the lab, another child blinked up at her and said, Are you my sister? Ella had done this before, creeping through corridors with only the hum of power conduits and distant footfalls for company. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't afraid. The lab was buried 6 floors beneath her father's old tech facility, now shut down, bought out, and supposedly clean of all its dark past. But Ella knew better. The real secrets weren't in company files. They were in the places no one dared to look. She passed rental scanners and locked doors with ease. Her father's DNA still ran in her blood. His cruel legacy now turned against itself. At the end of a narrow tunnel, she found it. A cryogenic chamber room sealed off in darkness. One chamber was blinking red, malfunctioning. Inside was a child. The girl was no older than 6. Her features weren't identical to Ella's, but they shared something, a kind of stillness, the same hollow, searching eyes, and something far more terrifying. the neural signature chip embedded at the base of her skull, just like the one Ella had removed from herself months ago. The girl's voice trembled. "Are you here to take me back?" Ella knelt down. "No, sweetie, I'm here to take you out." It didn't take long for alarms to go off, but Ella had planned for this. While the lab scrambled, she hacked the security feeds and wiped both their names from every system. Then, holding the girl tightly against her chest, she whispered, "You're not property. You're not data. You're a person, and I'm going to show you what that means." Together, they ran through the chaos, dodging guards, leaping elevators, and bursting into moonlight just as the building went into lockdown. A week later, Layla opened her apartment door to find Ella standing there, mud-streaked, tired, and holding the hand of a silent little girl. "This is Ivy," Ella said. "She was next." Layla swallowed the lump in her throat and stepped aside. "Then we make sure she's the last." That night, Ella watched Ivy sleep on the couch, clutching a stuffed bunny Layla had found. Callan sat beside her and asked, "So what now?" Ella looked out the window, toward the stars. "Now we build something better." She smiled faintly. "No more running.